Hello and welcome to Footnotes, the Cicerone podcast, a podcast to inspire you about outdoor travel and activities in the UK and across the world. I'm Hannah and I hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to Cicerone Live. Tonight we're talking to Joe Williams, Publishing Director at Cicerone Press. He's just got back from Peru and he has been talking the hind legs off anybody in the office about how wonderful it was. So he wants to share with you guys everything about Peru. He did the Huayhuash trek, but I will let him explain because obviously he knows far more about it than I do. Hello, Joe.
Hey, Hannah, how you doing?
I'm good. I've not seen you for about an hour. So, Joe, we're talking tonight about Peru, and you've just got back from Peru, and it's a trip that you've wanted to do for ages. Can you just explain where it was and how the Cicerone guidebook to Peru differs from the trek that you did?
Yeah, sure. So we went to the Cordillera Huayhuash, which is a really small, compact but spectacular mountain range pretty much in the center of Peru. It's just to the south of an area called the Cordillera Blanca, which is where the highest peaks in Peru are. The Cicerone book is for the Inca trails, so that covers hiking and biking in that area, which is a bit further to the south. I mean, we wanted to do a kind of like a high alpine trek with like really dramatic scenery and huge amounts of ups and downs. Whereas you'd probably choose to do the Inca trails if you were interested in more of a bit more of a cultural aspect and the historical side of things with the Inca history. And while the mountains are still very steep and there's still lots of ups and downs, it's not as quite at such high altitude. So it's probably a bit better for people that don't want to go up to 5,000 meters, which is not everybody really.
Yeah, that is pretty high. That's not going to suit everyone. I'm not sure what biking at that altitude would be like either.
God, I can't imagine.
Well, I guess what you're going to do is do a presentation and we're going to get to see some lovely photos and at least one picture that is not that lovely of you looking really fed up and grumpy, but I'm sure you'll explain why. So I'll leave you to it and yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Hannah. Great. So it is a really nice opportunity to be able to talk about my holiday. I guess I get to see some amazing book proposals from authors for amazing places around the world. And many of these things we then get to turn into books, but the Huayhuash circuit is not something that we've got a book to. Well, not yet at least. Right. So what is it? Well, it's a trek in the middle of Peru. The area is particularly, or most known or most famous for being the setting for where Touching the Void happened. You may know this story. It's the Joe Simpson book where he and his climbing partner, Simon Yates, climbing up a big mountain. There was an accident. There was a rope cutting incident and then a dramatic crawl down the glacier and sort of a bit of a self-rescue. So it's this kind of famous area on the mountain of Siulá Grande in this mountain range. The Huayhuash circuit, well, there's various ways that you can do it, but it's commonly about 120 kilometers, something like that, with, I think it's somewhere between 8 and 10,000 meters of ascent. It's probably more closer to 8, actually. It's usually done in, I guess, somewhere between sort of 10 to 13 days. That's kind of the normal kind of spread for people. We did it a bit quicker. We did it in 5 days, but I'll go on to talk about that a little bit more a bit later. Essentially, we wanted a slightly different experience, more on the challenge front, while still getting to enjoy this amazing area. So, as I mentioned, it's a bit of a difference to the Inca trails. It's for people that like high altitude. It's for people that want to go somewhere where there aren't any huts. It's not crazy remote, but it is pretty remote. There are some long climbs. Some of them are actually pretty long in terms of the amount of ascent, but many of them are just long in that they take a long time because it's at high altitude and because you're going slowly. It's for people that really like a spectacular alpine scenery. And the other thing, I suppose, is if you're looking for somewhere where you might be able to get away with still speaking a bit of English, it's not the right place to go. Everyone speaks Spanish and it's only Spanish. So where are we? Probably a bit hard to see on some people's screens here, but we can see Lima down here on the coast, the capital of Peru, then the city of Huaraz to the north of it, and then just to the south of Huaraz, that's where the Huayhuash. Cusco, for reference, is down here, and that's where the Inca Trails stuff happens. I guess where is Peru? Well, we can see the very top part of Peru here. The equator runs actually about 3 kilometers to the north of the furthest tip north of Peru. It's a bit of a closer view of the circuit. So it's kind of like the route that we did is a lollipop, I suppose. We're starting in that point far here in the northwest, we're coming east, and then we're going around in a clockwise direction. It's quite common for people to start up here, do the loop, and then finish in the town of Yamak here. I guess we wanted to complete a circuit, so that's why we sort of made this little tweak. So what's great about the trek? Well, the mountains, they're spectacular, scary looking, intimidating. As a climber, I'm both drawn to them and almost like repelled by them. They don't look like there's easy ways up many of these peaks, and certainly not easy ways down them. Anyone that's climbing these peaks is really, at the top of their game. The views, valleys, cols, the route passes always over a high point each day and then down into another valley. So you're always guaranteed changing scenery every day. And diverse scenery as well. This was just a photo taken sort of later on that day down a much greener looking valley. The people, no shots of people in this particular photo, but we can see these huts where shepherds, I don't know if they're based there permanently or if it's more of a seasonal thing, but yeah, there's plenty of people that live up in these high valleys. I mean, this photo here is taken at 4,000 meters. And that big peak that we can see in the back there, that's Yerupaha, which is 6,600 meters high. Absolutely enormous. But, there's plenty of people that live up in these valleys, and they're really nice and friendly and great to try to get your Spanish to the level where you can actually have a bit of a conversation. I guess the other nice thing about it is it can be your trek, your way. I mean, there aren't any huts there, so people that are keen on having an actual bed for the night are going to be disappointed. But there's lots of ways you can approach this route, either by making changes to the route as we did, making it a bit longer. There's plenty of variants. You can do things like they call it a mini Huayhuash, maybe sort of 3 or 4 days loop. But to get around the whole of the main mountain chain is going to take most people, 5 days in our case, but it's quite common for it to be 10 days. Right, so I guess I'll just tell you the story of our trek now. So before we came to Peru, we'd actually spent 10 days in Bolivia. I mean, I just couldn't possibly recommend Bolivia and Peru anymore to anyone that likes the mountains and likes traveling. They're just incredible places. So we got to see some wonderful things from that amazing scenery just outside of La Paz in the previous photo, to flamingos in lagoons at 4,500 meters with volcanoes dotted around, through to enjoying a glass of red wine and some snacks on the Bolivian salt flats in the Salar de Uyuni, which is, that's got to be on everybody's to-do list to actually go and visit those places. And then additionally, we did quite a bit of high altitude walking and a bit of mountaineering as well. This is a popular 6,000 meter peak in the back right there called Huayna Potosi. It's quite an easy one, but wonderful place for us to acclimatize and then get ready for heading off to Peru. So how to get to the Huayhuash? I'm going to go into much more detail a bit later on like the logistics and the practicalities of everything. But I'll tell you what we did. We flew to Lima. We had a couple of connections in order to get there. But for most people visiting from Europe or from the US, flights typically leave in the morning between 9 and midday, and various connections typically end up depositing you in Lima in the evening of that same day. So you might well have the option of being able to get on a bus to the city of Huaraz straight away. What we did is we were coming from La Paz, we got an early morning flight, and then we got a day bus to Huaraz. For anyone that's not traveled in South America, and this was my first experience of South American travel, the common way to get around is by, I guess you'd call it by a coach, but a pretty comfortable long distance coach that, reclines you a long way. They're very long journeys. The bus from Lima to Huaraz was, I think it was about 9 hours, and it stopped for about 40 minutes or so for a nice lunch break. So it's not much of a trial at all, particularly. We got to Huaraz that night. We stayed the night in a hostel, and then the next morning we had already organised a jeep, a guy called Freddie, to pick us up from our hostel and drive us the 3 hours to Yamak. So then that's where the trek begins. There's not really much to Llama. It's pretty low down for the Cordillera Huayhuash, only a bit over 3,000 meters, but it provides the starting point for the Huayhuash circuit. It's pretty hot in comparison to the rest of the trail. We didn't really get much skin exposed when we were higher up in the mountains, but certainly well over 20 degrees in Llama. I mean, after cresting the first col, we got our first view of the main Cordillera Huayhuash range. And yeah, just an amazing sight to see. We'd seen it from further off as we were driving, both on the bus and on the Jeep ride. But you know, it's always so exciting, isn't it, when you're approaching the mountain and getting closer and closer, and then finally you're in them. Our first day was a half day, really, only about 6 or 7 hours. This was a half day in our schedule, anyway. I thought I'd been should be pretty well acclimatized by this point, but actually I ended up having a pretty bad headache at the camp that night. Also, that night we met the only other independent trekkers there. There were plenty of people walking the route. It never feels busy at all. And we did have at least one camp where we didn't see any other tents in that area that night. So yeah, definitely a good one for independent trekkers, but not many people there. We had a nice, cute visitor that night. This is Barry, as we named him. As soon as we got into this first night's camp, Barry, who presumably lives in the area of the camp, came and guarded Caroline and I all night. Whenever any other trekkers walked past to go to the latrines, Barry gave them a good solid barking at. He was curled up loyally outside of our tent all night, and also tried to get into the tent all the time, which was a bit awkward. But what a place to spend the night. Most of the sunsets we had were absolutely spectacular. It's worth taking a tripod, I'd say, and definitely worth taking a decent camera. In mountains like this, you're going to get a really good result from bringing a better camera than what's on your phone. And you can start to tell the difference when you're getting really good lenses and really good processors in there too. Day 2, dawn pretty cold. And this was actually a common theme for most of the treks. Each morning, it being, we'd be wearing all of our layers. And we didn't bring that many layers, but talking about long sleeve base layer, insulated, windproof, and then a full-on synthetic overjacket on the top, hat, gloves, winter weight leggings. Yeah, we were wearing everything in the mornings. And by the time we got to the top of the first col, we sort of had this realization about what we got ourselves in for. It had taken us about the same amount of time as the guidebook says it should take us. Now, that might not be that weird a thing to say, but we're commonly used to exceeding guidebook times. I think what we were discovering was that the weight of our bags, which admittedly are not that large there for a 5-day trek, but a decent weight nonetheless, meant that we were traveling slower than we might have hoped for, which basically made us realize, okay, we're going to have some pretty long days here. Caroline's still quite happy at this point, and it mostly remained that way as we went on. But yeah, the scenery is changing all the time. It's absolutely, I mean, literally, this was just a couple of hours after that previous photo and the dramatic icy mountains before it. We occasionally see these mining roads. They're not a particularly big issue from a trekker's perspective, but they do show you that it's not wilderness. It's remote, but it's not wilderness. At this point, this was on our day 2, but we had walked 2 of the guidebook days, and we still had another guidebook day to go. And this was at about 3:30 in the afternoon. The big peak we can see at the back here is Girishanka, which is quite a famous mountain and spectacularly difficult. There have been some quite hard British ascent new route on Girishanka as well. It was a pretty long day, this day 2. At this point, we're kind of racing the darkness, running down to the last camp as the mountains of Siulá Grande and Yarupaha gather their clouds for the evening. But that next day, it was a bit regrettable, really. It dawned a bit cloudy. I mean, definitely it's still a spectacular view, but it was a bit of a shame that we didn't have it perfectly clear. And it didn't really shift all morning. It was amazing walking past the Triple Lakes underneath these great peaks as we headed up to Paso Siulá, which is shade under 5,000 meters. Cresting 5,000 meters for the first time on day 3 of our trek. This was where we took one of the variant route. I think people sometimes call it the Alpine variant. So this took us over a 5,000 meter pass rather than what does my map say? 4,900 meter pass, but it did save us a little bit of distance. We got to see some incredible views. This day you get really, really close to these huge mountains. Over the top of that first pass, that 5,000 meter pass, Caroline had a bit of a tough time. My tough time was to come the next day. But as soon as we got over that pass, we were greeted with this incredible view that just blew us away. It was absolutely stunning. The thing we did miss by adapting this day was the hot springs, which we were really quite gutted about, but it would have meant a spectacularly long day with many hours of walking in the dark, and we just weren't really that excited about it. So we missed the hot springs, but I guess we'll have to go back and do that variant another year. It was a shorter day than some of the days that we'd had. We got into camp before it got dark, which was a bit of a novelty. But that night, for me, a headache started coming on again. I'd been having headaches on and off from the altitude, but yeah, it didn't really. I went to sleep with it. I felt it through the night, and then, as often happens at higher altitudes, because you're at rest and therefore your respiration rate slows down, well, you're getting in basically less oxygen than you might want. So it's quite common to actually wake up with a headache as well. So that is what happened for me. And I felt pretty rough that next morning, but we knew that the view was going to be incredible over the high pass. We could have taken a variant option down the valley. And in fact, we probably should have done. I think it was, in hindsight, actually not even in hindsight, it felt this way at the time. It would have been a better move to have taken it a bit easy and walked down the valley instead of going over another 5,000 meter pass that next morning. So we did go up that pass that next day, and we did see this mental view of the west face of Siulá Grande, which is where the Touching the Void incidents all happen. And yeah, it was wonderful to see, but my head was absolutely pounding. At the pass, I was actually getting quite concerned. We had a quick conversation, Caroline and I, and we agreed that I was going to basically run down and try to descend as much as possible so I could start feeling a little bit better. And actually that helped. That helped massively by descending quickly, stopping briefly to catch a quick snap of Siulá Grande. But again, that ascent to that Passo Urao was extremely cold. But again, it was another long day. This day was about a 20-mile walking day, so over 30 kilometers. We'd walked down a very long valley and then began another very long ascent. So by this point, we were on the last ascent of the day, which was actually a 1,400 meter long climb. And at this point, we're 700 meters up that climb. And we'd just been overtaken by a young family, father, mother, and a daughter with their dog and their mule. And they'd come up with the daughter, who was probably about 6 or 7 years old, after school. I think she'd been down in the village in the valley below, been to school all day. They'd all walked back up 700 meters, and this appeared to be where they lived. Obviously, they stormed past us without any little effort at all. But it was great to see them living up here. It was a really long climb, this one on day 4. And especially with my head suffering from earlier in the day, this was my big struggle day. We can see over here some tents. So this is one of the organized commercial expeditions that we walked straight past them and kept on going up that mountain and over to the other side. So 12 hours into the day, and yeah, it's starting to get dark, and the legs are hurting a little bit. The headache is starting to come back. We're getting close to 5,000 meters again. I find this a really lovely moment. Many people, I guess, people may not be able to relate to this, but it's when you're out in the mountains at the end of the day, and you've still actually got quite a long way till you get to camp. You know that it's going to get dark on you before you get to camp. So at that point, why rush? You can it sort of becomes a little bit more peaceful. But then 13 hours into the day, it really did get dark. And by that point, we then still had another half hours walking in the darkness to get to that final night's camp. But that didn't stop the beauty of it being appreciated at all. Day 5, this was our last day on the trail. We took a little bit of a split, Caroline taking a higher ridge to get some additional photos and me dropping down. We had to walk along a long levada that carries water to the village of llama below. And again, as we descended, it got hotter and hotter. And then eventually we popped out in Yamak, that small little village where we'd been dropped off 5 days beforehand. And thankfully, Freddie, our driver, was right there. And when I asked him if he knew where I could buy a Coke, all of a sudden he sort of nipped round the corner in this sort of really quiet little village. I ended up chatting to a woman who then opened a random closed door on the street, and all of a sudden this was her shop. So it was great that we got to buy some Coke and make a small contribution to the local economy. And 3 hours drive later on the Jeep with Freddie, and we were back in Huayhuash that night for a celebratory Italian Peruvian fusion meal. Huayhuash is a really cool place. It's a bit like, I don't know, it's like the Chamonix of South America, and very keen to go back. So yeah, that was really the story of our circuit.
What on earth did you eat at an Italian Peruvian restaurant?
Oh yeah, good question. It's not really, it's probably a bit, they call it Italian Peruvian fusion, but actually the plates typically look like a pasta dish and then a Peruvian dish. It just happens to be on the same plate, but not unpleasant. I
also have a question from a very well-known little Peruvian bear.
That looks like Paddington.
Did you see any bears when you were on your trip?
I'm afraid, Paddington, that we didn't. There are bears around. I think they're more particularly in the jungle in Peru, and they're the spectacled bear. So we didn't see any bears. Actually, in the Huayhuash, we saw a lot of cows. I think this kind of it's worked land, even though it's so high. There's people that work up there and maintain their livestock, but cows that were pretty cool. Like they were able to walk up and run down a scree slope, a 45-degree scree slope at 4,800 meters. I thought that was a pretty cool cow.
Yeah, Paddington can do that and not lose his hat. He's not impressed. But
impressive.
He always wants to contribute to these live events, and I always say no. But today I just couldn't ignore him because it is his homeland. So,
it's good to have him on.
Yeah, sorry for that interruption. So here, it looks like you're quite low down, but how high are you at this village?
Well, the flat valley floor that we see below right here is 4,050 meters. And it's really hard to make out, but there is a camp just beside that lake. The peaks behind, right in slap bang in the center of the picture, that's Siulá. I'll just check the map. 6,094 meters high, and Yerupaha up here, 6,600 meters high. But yeah, just even the valley floors are at 4,000 meters. Most of the time in the Huayhuash circuit, you're doing passes that are between 4,700 and 5,000 meters high, and you're camping at any altitude between 4,000 meters and 4,500 meters.
Yeah, amazing. And just quickly, one more thing. What guidebook did you use? Because we've already mentioned that we don't have a Cicerone guidebook yet. So what did you use?
Yeah, good question. We used this one, actually. It's from Trailblazer. It's a really nice book, even though we really struggled to better the guidebook times. I think that, I do think we can generally do quite a good pace, Caroline and I, but I think Neil and Harriet are beasts. Yeah. But no, it was a good book. Actually, what we did is the old classic thing. We ripped out some pages. I know some people think that this is a blasphemous thing to do, but this weighed pretty much nothing, and we could have it in the pocket all the time. Yeah, nice book.
Yeah, cool. I don't know whether you're going to come on to talk about that, but I just thought we may as well plug a book, even if it's not our own book.
Yeah, definitely.
So, right, I'll let you get back to it. Joe's just going to talk for a few more minutes about practicalities and stuff like that. But yeah, get the questions sent in, and we'll ask him them at the end.
Yes, do fire away with the questions. I'll try and cover what I can here. So planning and logistics for doing something like this. I guess, I'm not like the guidebook author. I'm just some guy that went on holiday. So I only know from the research that I did, those people that I've spoken to and other approaches that I've seen. But the way we did things is we were completely independent, I would say. The thing that we did want some help with was just the transport from the city of Huayhuash to Llama, which is the village where the trail starts. So it's a 3-hour drive. It cost us 800 Peruvian soles, which is about £170, something like for both ways. That's it round trip. Quite expensive, I suppose, for 3-hour taxi rides, but it meant that we could get dropped off and picked up exactly when we wanted. Other than that, we were self-sufficient. So we had bought food in Lima before we then ended up going on to Huaraz before the trek. Food. Well, this is me eating lunch, which consisted grandly of 2 dry tortillas. Not great, really, but when you're moving long distances and quickly, we know that compromises sometimes need to be made. But, it wasn't too bad. I did actually find that we had some protein bars with us, and I found my stomach wasn't able to cope with it. I think it's the combination of exercise and altitude. It just gave me a stomach ache, so I couldn't even eat some of the food that we brought with us as well. But basically, I'll just talk through our day food. In the morning, we had a mug full of porridge. That was just from like little sachets that you just pour boiling water in. During the day, we had snacks like tortillas and some bars and nuts and a trail mix and this kind of thing, some chocolate. And then as soon as we got to camp, we made quite a nice discovery of having hot juice on arrival at camp. So we made quite a lot of it and we were able to drink it quite quickly, but it also warmed us up, which was really nice. But because we were often getting into camp when it was getting dark or when it had already been dark, we needed to have like a really quick routine. So I would brew up the juice and boil water for our dehydrated meals while Caroline and then by the time the meals had rehydrated, the tent would have been put up. We jumped straight into the tent, into our sleeping bags, and ate and then fell asleep. It all happened really rather quickly and we really needed the rest. It was really tough. So this is our kit packing in Huaraz before we got on our Jeep. And we did pack pretty light. If anyone's really curious about this, I'm definitely a big gear nerd myself. So if anyone wants, wants our packing list, I'd be very happy to provide the Excel spreadsheet with all of its weights and tick list and all that sort of thing. But yeah, any other questions that come right now, then just, please fire away. Our packs weighed, including food and water, I think 10, 11 kilos or something like that. One of the issues was that we did have to take quite big sleeping bags. The temperature at night it's freezing most nights, and it can be -5, -10 at night. And then it's getting up to sort of low teens in the daytime. So we did have to carry really big sleeping bags. And you can see here that I'm getting a dual use out of it and wearing it at camp. Now, you can see on the right there are kind of our standard attire, which would have been long sleeve base layer, a buff and a hat. And probably the most underrated and most versatile jacket that I've ever come across, which is the Marmot Dry Climb wind shirt, which is like a windproof outer layer and a super, super thin micro fleece on the inside. It's really breathable, keeps you warm, and it's windproof. So I guess it's a good point to touch about on our fast packing / ultralight backpacking kind of experience versus the other way of doing things, which would be a bit more comfortable and maybe carrying a 70-litre rucksack and taking 10 days or 12 days over the route, or maybe even going with a commercial organisation for mules to carry all of your kit. I mean, we had a pretty small tent. We couldn't sit up. To be fair, one person could sit up at a time, but not both of us. It was a pretty small tent that weighed 1 kilo. But again, the problem with that is our sleeping bags were so big and more like winter weight sleeping bags that they pressed against the inner lining of the tent. And because it's a lightweight and not winter worthy tent, the outer and the inner tent would often touch. So our sleeping bags also got wetter and wetter as the 5 days went on. Actually, to the point where on day 4, we just got the sleeping bags out of our rucksacks and we had them on like cape over the top of our rucksacks in order to dry them out as we were walking for a couple of hours. It worked pretty well. Normally, you'd be able to get to camp, early afternoon and then get your sleeping bag airing out maybe on top of the tent and take in the views and sort of just chill out a little bit. But we didn't have time for that. We had to do things while walking. So there's a couple of ways of, I guess, adapting the Huayhuash circuit. I'm just going to talk about how one might make it even cheaper than we did it, and how somebody might make it a bit more expensive. I guess the thing to say is that there's not that much variability in the flight costs, regardless of really where you're coming from to get to Lima. It's relatively expensive, but it's generally pretty cheap country when you're there. So how could we have made it cheaper? We could have avoided getting the private jeep, which for us, £170. You could have got a bus. Actually, I think you need to get a couple of buses / collectivos. It certainly would be doable, but our Spanish would no way was going to be up to that. Could have got a cheaper hostel in Lima or Huaraz. We could have avoided buying dehydrated meals. We could have either made our own or just bought some cheap noodles from a supermarket. I can't think of that many other ways to make it that much cheaper, but to make it a little bit more luxurious, the option would be to go with an agency. I think about £1,000 gets you a spot on a fully organised and guided trip with a local operator. To go with one of the more well-known international and English-speaking operators, I think it's more like £3,000. You could go, even further and have it like a fully private trek organised. It's got to be said, it would be a really nice way to do this trek, to take a little bit more time, to have time in camp to relax at the end of each day, to carry small rucksacks, to enjoy the pleasures of the mess tent in the evening, to enjoy a chair. I mean, a chair, we were nowhere near being able to have a chair with the size of our packs and our weight allowance. Have somebody cook your meals for you. I mean, that sounds all quite nice. And that would probably be a good way to do the trek again in the future one day. But for us, that challenge of fast packing and trying to run little bits where we could, not much to be fair, but running a little bit, and that sort of continuous movement, and then I guess the satisfaction of having done it all yourself, and looking after yourselves in those high mountains for 5 days and doing those kind of distances. Like, it's a different experience, and I don't really find one to be better than the other. It just depends what you're after. So that was our Huayhuash experience.
Oops, I was muted. Sorry. Yeah, that was really funny. That comment about the chair. I remember when I went trekking and getting back to somewhere where I could sit on a proper chair, and just being like, I'd already had a hot shower, so it was already like the best day of my life. But then sitting on an actual chair, it's funny how you just, the simple things just feel amazing after a little time without them. We have a question from Sandy. You didn't share any pictures of local residents, but what was their clothing like? Was it different to the sort of typical clothing of North America or Europe?
Yeah, apologies for not including any photos there. I'm a terrible portrait photographer, and probably not brave enough to try and practice my shocking Spanish to ask somebody if I can take their photo. But I guess the answer is it was relatively unique clothing. The people up there, for the most part, I guess there's two kind of groups that I would sort of categorize. Firstly, some of the ladies in the area, they've always got a nice characteristic hat, a colorful bit of, I do apologize for not knowing the words for any of these things, but like a big bit of cloth that's kind of like a shawl, but actually you can carry stuff in it, and they do carry stuff in it. And then thinking about the guys on horseback, so there's like literally real Peruvian cowboys, with like cowboy boots and and a hat and then a poncho, on top as well. Yeah, those guys were very cool.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Daniel's got a question saying, if you wanted to avoid a severe headache, which sounds very sensible, Daniel, what sort of time would you suggest to take over this trek? That's
a really good question, Daniel. Well, obviously, there's the annoying answer of it depends, because altitude's a relatively individual kind of thing. But I wouldn't suggest anybody goes from sea level or more or less sea level, flies to Lima, gets a bus to Huaraz, goes straight to Llama, and comes straight onto the Huayhuash circuit. I think that's a recipe, even if you go really slow, probably for landing yourself in trouble. I would recommend, and certainly the authors of the Trailblazer book do this too, I recommend staying in Huaraz, which is at 3,000 meters. Stay there for a few days. There's loads of cool things to see around the town, and acclimatization hikes to go higher and higher. A nice place to stay, to gradually acclimatize over I don't know. I think probably like 3 or 4 days would be a really, really good base for you to then get straight over to the Huayhuash and go around the circuit. Yeah, I think that's probably the right way of doing it.
At what point would you have decided that was enough? You needed to stop, or you needed to go down a lot lower?
Yeah, it's a great question. The one of the luxury items, if you can call it this, or maybe it was an essential item that we took with us, was another one of the books behind us. Actually, it was the Cicerone Pocket Wilderness and First Aid book, and we used this as a reference like a bunch of times, just for kind of checking in on what our symptoms were and whether it was anything to be concerned about. And there's various kind of checklists in the book, and a thing called the Lake Louise score, where you can sort of assess yourself and say, okay, I'm probably okay. I've got this and this, but I don't have these 5 other things. Or it's not so, I've got a bad headache, but I don't have these other symptoms. So that was actually really useful, being able to sort of refer to that and check in on that. I mean, for myself, I just had an enormous headache over Paso Llorado, but there wasn't anything more than that. Heart was sort of kind of about under control. My respiration rate was okay. In the main concern, considering that headache symptom, would be cerebral edema, and my coordination was spot on. I was fully conscious. My cognitive capabilities were fine. But it's really, I do think it is really important, whether you are independent or on an organized trip, to be really clued into what the symptoms of more severe altitude illness are. So that of a cerebral or pulmonary edema, and then to you've got to be like totally open with yourself and with others about what's going on, because there's many places here where it would take a really long time to get to, sometimes sort of just even to get lower altitude, let alone get to, I don't know, a hospital. So yeah, it's worth being careful.
Yeah, Jaquetta's got a further point actually about this. How were you so sure that your headache was from altitude and not altitude-induced dehydration? And how much water did you carry, and how much did you drink per day?
Right. So firstly, and I hope this isn't too controversial, my understanding of dehydration and headaches as a symptom are that the two are not related, and that's been quite well proven in the literature now. But we can save that possible debate for another time. But we were certainly trying to drink quite a lot. We filtered all of our water, I guess we should say. We both carried 2 500 milliliter soft flasks, and we had filter caps on top of them. So that's what we used all the time. Or we boiled our water. So when we got into camp at night, we didn't filter it. We just did a rolling boil, as the First Wilderness and Medicine and First Aid book suggested. Did a rolling boil for, I can't remember if it was a minute or 2 minutes, and then used that for drinking and for our meals. But how much were we drinking? Probably about 5 litres a day, 4 or 5 litres a day, something like that. We had been taking Diamox as well, which is a drug to assist in acclimatization. And it does have a diuretic effect as well. So you do need to, additionally keep on top of that fluid intake if you're taking that.
And don't drink yellow snow.
No, don't do that.
Finally, another top tip from me.
Yeah.
I never have that much to contribute in these sessions. Bridget's got a question about the time of year. So you've only just got back, so you were there for most of June. Yeah. But what sort of weather window is there for doing the Huayhuash?
Yeah, another really good question. So we went in the Peruvian winter, which basically means, it's a bit colder, but what it does do is it almost guarantees that it's not going to rain. And maybe not guarantees, but I think they don't have very many rainy or cloudy days through the winter. June, July, August, and I think actually September as well are all really good months for going. So it's a really good long season where you can do this stuff. And we were there in June. It was impeccable. Apart from that one day where Siulá Grande and the Yorupaha were in the clouds. I mean, it didn't rain. I mean, can't really complain. Yeah, so it's really, and that's another great thing is it's just so reliable. You're pretty well guaranteed to have some good photographs and have a good holiday.
So when you were doing your packing, did did you rely on it not raining?
No, we brought waterproofs, but we brought really, really, really light ones, and we didn't use them at all. They just stayed in the bottom of the bag. But yeah, you can get away. I think when the climate is like that, you can get away with not bringing your full-on 3-layer Gore-Tex jacket with, that's guaranteed.
Yeah, cool. And another question from Bridget, actually. How much navigation did you need to do? Were there tracks and was the route clear?
There are tracks. There are basically no signposts whatsoever. It's relatively clear. We had 3 tools with us for helping with navigation. We had the ripped out pages from the Trailblazer book. We had a really high quality map from the Austrian Alpine Club, amazingly, who produce a map to a part of Peru. Yeah, it's a really, really good quality map. And then we also had phone. So in this case, I used Outdoor Active app. I uploaded the GPX file that we wanted into it, and I saved the base map for offline use. So between those 3 things, we had multiple options for helping us navigate, and we used all 3, for different kind of purposes. The guidebook for more day-to-day use, the map for in the evening that night, looking at the next day ahead to get a bit more context, and then any specific points, particularly when it got dark for us, I just grabbed the phone out and just did a quick double check. Yeah, not too big a deal.
Okay, one thing we did say that we would mention is how to say the word llama, which is not llama.
No, it's a good point. So in Spanish, llama is spelled with double L at the start. So it's a llama.
It's going to take a little bit of getting used to.
Yeah, it now feels a bit wrong to say llama. Now we've got used to saying llama, because it was like one of the very few Spanish words that we could actually say. So we impressed anyone that wanted to listen by pointing out llamas, and they were impressed. Yeah.
I can fully imagine this crazy guy. Just nod, just smile.
Yeah, smile and nod.
Yeah, and I know that you've had such a brilliant time doing this route, but what's next for you in Peru? Would you do the route again, or would you do a different area?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, as soon as even while we were there, we were planning our next trip. It wasn't a question of we started planning our next trip as soon as we got home. Yeah, it was even while we were there. I'd like to go to the range just to the north of the Huayhuash, the Cordillera Blanca, which is huge, much bigger, and even higher mountains. There's something like a dozen 6,000 meter peaks. And again, there's some great treks there, like the Santa Cruz route and the Alpamayo, the base camp route. So some great treks and some big mountains to climb. Yeah, I think that would be a pretty good spot. But it's just like quite an easy place in terms of high mountain areas to go. You don't have to, it depends if you want this or not, but you don't have to trek for like a week or 2 weeks in order to actually see some high mountains. You fly to Lima, you get on an 8-hour bus. It can be overnight. You can wake up the next morning in Huaraz and you can see half a dozen 6,000 meter peaks from the town center and be straight up there when you're acclimatized. It's just it's quite a convenient place to go if you like that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, it looked amazing. I mean, I can't wait to share my holiday snaps from my week doing DIY on my house.
Yeah, next week's live event.
Yeah, I hope everybody tunes in for that one. But thank you, Joe. That was great. And again, just to reiterate, we don't have a guidebook for the route that you did, but the Trailblazer guidebook was excellent. We have got a guidebook to the Inca trails, hiking and biking those Inca trails. So if you are interested in going to that different area of Peru, you can have a look at that. Please also check out our other live events. We've got over 1,000 articles, live events, podcasts on our website, as well as sample routes for all our guidebooks and plenty more to help you, whether you just after a bit of inspiration or whether you want to do some detailed planning. Have a look at the website and see what there is there for you. And thank you so much, Joe, and thank you everybody for sending in your questions and joining us tonight. Take care, and we'll see you next month.
I hope you enjoyed the latest episode of Footnotes, the Cicerone podcast. I'd love to know what you think, or if there's anything you'd like us to cover in future episodes. Please email live@cicerone.co.uk or leave a review on your podcast platform. You can follow or subscribe to the podcast to make sure you don't miss new episodes, or you can sign up to our newsletter for all our latest news, events and guidebooks. Visit cicerone.co.uk for further details. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, come and find us on our social channels. We're on all the main ones as @Cicerone Press, and we also have a Facebook group, Cicerone Connect, where you can meet and chat to other outdoor enthusiasts. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you soon.